A single dad who broke down on the highway never expected the mysterious driver who stopped to be a billionaire on the run from her own life. A woman who would not only fix his car, but everything he thought was broken in his world. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching? From the heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves blurring the edges of the horizon into a watery mirage, the old minivan had died with a quiet sigh. Not a dramatic bang, just a slow surrender to the relentless sun and 1,000 miles of bad luck. Leo sat behind the wheel for a long moment, his hands resting on the cracked plastic, staring at the check engine light that had been his loyal companion for the last 3 states. It wasn't blinking anymore. It was just on steady and final like a tombstone in the back seat. His daughter Maya was humming softly to herself, coloring in a worn activity book with a half-melted crayon. She hadn't complained, not once, not since they'd packed the last of their things into boxes and driven away from the apartment they could no longer afford, not when the air conditioning gave out in Arizona, and not now as the silence of the dead engine settled around them like a shroud. He'd failed them. That was the thought that looped in his head, a dull, grinding repetition. He was an architect, or he had been one once before the firm downsized and his world contracted into a series of freelance drafting gigs and handyman jobs that barely kept their heads above water. Now all he had was this van, a cooler with 2 warm water bottles left in it, and a daughter who deserved a whole universe more than he could give her. "I think she's thirsty, Daddy," Maya said, not looking up from her drawing. Leo turned, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack his face. "Yeah, I think you're right." He opened the door, and the blast of desert heat hit him like a physical blow. He popped the hood and stared at the engine, a tangled mess of wires and hoses. He knew in theory how it all worked, but in practice he was just a man with a useless set of tools and a sinking feeling in his gut. He was halfway through checking the battery cable when he heard it. The soft electric hum of a car, slowing down. A sleek silver sedan pulled onto the shoulder, about 20 feet behind them. It was a model he didn't recognize. No logos, no flashy chrome, just clean lines, and an almost silent engine. A woman stepped out. She was tall, dressed in simple black jeans and a gray t-shirt that looked both comfortable and expensive. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and dark sunglasses hid her eyes. She moved with a kind of cautious stillness, like she wasn't used to standing on the side of a highway. "Everything okay?" she called out. Her voice was calm, steady, not the kind of voice you expected to hear in the middle of nowhere. Leo straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Yeah, we're fine, just taking a break," he said, the lie tasting like dust in his mouth. The woman walked closer, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. She stopped a few feet away and took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were a startling shade of blue, and they held a weariness that seemed at odds with her. "Polished appearance, you sure?" she asked, "because it looks like you're about to curse at your engine." He couldn't help a small smirk. "That might be the next step in my diagnostic process." She smiled back, a faint ghost of a thing. Then her gaze shifted to the open van door, where Maya was now peeking out with wide, curious eyes. Her smile softened, becoming a little more real. Maya held up a water bottle. "Is your car thirsty too?" The woman's expression flickered with something unreadable, something that wasn't pity, but closer to recognition. "I think it might be," she said, her voice losing its edge, and for the first time since the van had died, Leo felt a crack of light in the suffocating heat. Woman's name was Clara. She didn't offer a last name, and Leo didn't ask. She stood by her car, a silent observer, as he fiddled with a few more wires, knowing it was useless, but needing to do something with his hands. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy with the unspoken realities of a desolate highway and the vulnerability of being stranded. Maya, however, had no time for unspoken things. She slid out of the van, her small hand clutching a half-eaten bag of pretzels, and walked right up to Clara. My dad's an architect, she announced proudly. He designs big buildings with lots of windows. Clara knelt to her level, her gaze softening as she looked at the little girl. Is that so? Maya nodded. He's the best, but his boss was a grumpy Gus, so now we're on an adventure. Leo cringed from under the hood, his face flushing with heat. Maya, he said, his voice strained. That's enough, Clara. Just smile gently. Unbothered and adventure, huh? Sounds exciting. It's mostly just hot, Maya said matter-of-factly. But we're going to see the ocean, Dad promised. Clara looked over at Leo, her eyes holding a question he couldn't quite decipher. He met her gaze for a brief moment, then looked away, focusing on a bolt that didn't need tightening. She knows more than she should, he muttered quietly to Clara. Clara stood, her posture straight, her attention still fixed on Leo. He was a man trying to hold the world together with frayed rope and sheer force of will. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he kept his voice steady for his daughter, even when his own frustration was a visible current under his skin. Her own father had been a man of grand gestures and loud declarations, but he'd never once looked at her with the quiet, focused devotion Leo had for Maya. She had been a project, a legacy, an heir, not a daughter, not in the way that mattered. Her world had been full of everything money could buy and empty of everything it couldn't. I have a tow service on my plan, she said finally, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. They can be here in an hour. Leo immediately shook his head. I can't afford a tow right now, especially not out here. He said it without shame, just a flat statement of fact, and we'll figure it out. Clara didn't argue. She just nodded and leaned against her car, arms crossed. Well then, she said, it's a long hour until sunset. I've got a deck of cards and a questionable taste in music. If you're interested. Leo looked at her, surprised by the offer, surprised by her stillness. She wasn't rushing off, she wasn't treating them like a burden. She was just there. Maya's face lit up. Can we play? Go fish? Clara smiled. I think that can be arranged, and just like that the three of them sat on a dusty blanket on the side of the road, the silence broken by the snap of cards and the quiet hum of an engine that wasn't theirs. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt, highway took on a different character. The harshness of the day softened into a deep orange glow, and the air grew cooler, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Leo had finally given up on the engine, resigning himself to the quiet wait for a miracle or a state trooper. Clara had won 4 out of 5 games of Go Fish, mostly because Maya kept accidentally showing her her cards. And then, giggling about it, they sat in a comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors of 26. The sky melt into one another. Maya had her head on Leo's lap, half asleep, her breathing slow, and even he gently stroked her hair, his touch a silent promise of safety in a world that felt anything but safe. You're good with her, Clara said quietly, her voice barely disturbing the stillness. Leo didn't look up. She's the only thing I got right. Clara watched him. The way his calloused fingers moved through his daughter's hair, the deep lines of worry around his eyes that softened. Only when he looked at her, she had seen men command boardrooms, men who moved markets with a single phone call. But she had never seen strength like this. Quiet, unassuming, and absolute. It wasn't about power or control. It was about love, a concept that had become so foreign to her. It felt like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Where are you headed? She asked. Finally breaking the spell, he shrugged west. Maybe I've got a friend in California who owes me a favor, might be able to pick up some work there. If not, he trailed off, not wanting to voice the alternative. Clara didn't press. I'm headed that way too, she said casually. If you need a ride to the next town? I've got room. Leo looked at her. Then his pride, a sharp and familiar ache in his chest. We can't impose. I wouldn't offer if it was an imposition, she replied, her gaze steady and unwavering. Besides, Maya's already asleep in your lap. I don't think she's planning on walking. Leo looked down at his daughter's peaceful face, and the fight went out of him for the first time in a long time. He let someone else take the wheel. "Okay," he said, his voice low and rough. "Just to the next town." "Thank you." Clara nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "You haven't heard my playlist." The tow truck arrived just as the first stars began to prick. The deep indigo sky, a hulking beast of a machine with flashing lights that painted the desert in brief strobing colors. Leo spoke with the driver in low tones, a quiet negotiation that ended with him signing a form and handing over a slip of paper with the address of a garage in a town he'd never heard of. A town called Havenwood. The driver gave a nod, and with a groan of hydraulics, the minivan was lifted onto the flatbed, its headlights staring blankly into the night, like the eyes of a creature that had given up the fight. Leo watched it go a part of him, feeling like he was watching his whole past being hauled away. He turned back to Clara's car, where Maya was already buckled in the back seat, fast asleep. Her head pillowed on a soft leather headrest that probably cost more than his last month's rent. He slid into the passenger seat, the door closing with a soft, solid thud that sealed them in a capsule of quiet luxury. The car smelled faintly of new leather and something clean like bergamot. It was a stark contrast to the familiar scent of old coffee and spilled juice in his van. The dashboard glowed with a minimalist display, soft blue lines and elegant typography. It was a car designed to be invisible, yet everything about it screamed money. Clara drove with a quiet confidence, her hands resting lightly on the wheel. She didn't turn on the radio, instead, letting the silence of the road fill the space between them. They drove, for what felt like an hour, the dark ribbon of highway unfolding before them, illuminated only by the car's powerful headlights. Leo watched the landscape pass by a blur of sagebrush and distant mesas. He felt a strange sense of dislocation, like he was a character in someone else's story, sitting in a car he didn't belong in, next to a woman he didn't know, heading to a town that was just a name on a map. "Thanks again for this," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I don't know what we would have done." She glanced over her profile, lit for a second by the glow of an oncoming truck. "You would have figured it out." He wasn't so sure about that. He'd been so focused on survival, on the next step, the next meal, the next tank of gas, that he hadn't allowed himself to think about what would happen if the next step led off a cliff. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, changing the subject. Clara shook her head. "No, I'm from a place with more concrete than sky." He knew what she meant. He used to live in a place like that too, a place where the buildings he designed scraped the clouds and the people inside them never looked up. "Well," she said, her voice softer, "now welcome to the middle of nowhere." He smiled, a genuine one. "This time, that's one way to put it." And as the lights of Havenwood appeared in the distance, a small cluster of warmth in the vast darkness, Leo couldn't help but feel a sliver of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a fragile, cautious flicker of hope. Havenwood was a town that time had forgotten to update. The main street was lined with brick buildings from the early 20th century, their facades faded but proud. A single blinking traffic light swayed in the center of the town's only major intersection, and the neon sign of the Lone Motel, the Sleepy Hollow Inn, hummed with a low electric buzz. Clara pulled into the motel's gravel parking lot and cut the engine. The silence that rushed in was different. From the highway's silence, it was alive with the distant chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Leo looked around. The place was quiet, unassuming, and for reasons he couldn't name it felt safe. "I can get a www.com room," he said, already reaching for his wallet. Clara put a hand on his arm, gentle but firm. "It's late. Let me handle this one. You can pay me back tomorrow." He started to protest, but she was already out of the car, moving toward the brightly lit office with a grace that seemed out of place. Against the backdrop of peeling paint and overgrown rose bushes, he watched her go, then turned to check on Maya. She was still asleep, her face serene in the dim light of the parking lot. He felt a pang of guilt for dragging her into this mess, for the instability and the uncertainty, for the fact that their home was now a series of motel rooms, and the back of a van that was probably being picked apart for scrap metal in a dusty garage. A few minutes later, Clara returned with 2 key cards in her hand. "They're adjoining rooms," she said, handing him one. "It's the best they had." He took the key, his fingers brushing hers for a brief second. The contact was light, but it sent a small jolt through him, an awareness of her that he had been trying to ignore. "I really appreciate this, Clara," he said, his voice earnest. "I mean it." She just nodded, her expression unreadable. I know the next hour passed in a blur of quiet efficiency. They carried a sleeping Maya into one of the rooms and tucked her into the surprisingly clean bed. Leo pulled their duffel bags from Clara's trunk, his movements slow and tired. Clara didn't hover, she just stood. By the open doorway, a silent presence, offering support without words. When everything was inside, Leo stood in the middle of the room, feeling the full weight of the day settle on him. The room was simple: a bed, a small table, a lamp with a penchant crooked shade. But it felt like a palace. After the cramped confines of the van, "You should get some rest," he said to Clara. She nodded, but didn't move. "You too." He hesitated, then walked to the adjoining door and paused. "Thanks again for everything, for stopping for the ride." For this, she finally met his eyes, her gaze direct and clear. Everyone deserves a safe place to land. Leo, he didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and closed the door between their rooms. But he stood there for a long time, listening to the silence on the other side, a silence that felt less like an ending and more like a pause. The morning light in Havenwood was soft and golden, filtering through the thin motel curtains and painting stripes across the worn carpet. Leo was awake before the sun, his mind already racing with a to-do list that felt both insurmountable and urgent. Find the garage, find a job, find a way to get them out of this limbo. He showered quickly, pulling on the same jeans and a clean t-shirt, the only other one he had. That wasn't wrinkled beyond repair. When he stepped out, he found a small paper bag sitting just outside his door. Inside were 2 warm muffins, a container of fresh fruit, and a small carton of milk. A note was tucked inside, written on a motel napkin, in elegant looping script: "Thought you and Maya might need this. See you whenever you're ready, Clara." He stared at the note, a strange mix of gratitude and suspicion warring in his chest. It was a kind gesture, impossibly kind. But it also felt like charity, and his pride bristled at the thought. He knocked on the adjoining door a moment later. She opened it, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, her hair still damp from a shower. She looked rested, softer than she had. "On the highway?" "You didn't have to do that," he said. Holding up the bag, she leaned against the doorframe. "I wanted to." He didn't argue. He just nodded and handed her one of the muffins. They ate in a comfortable silence, standing in their respective doorways, the quiet of the morning broken only by the sound of a distant train whistle. "I'm going to head to the garage," he said. "Finally, check on the van and see if I can talk to the owner about some work." Clara nodded. "Mind if I tag along? You don't have to spend your day in a dusty garage." "Well," she said with a faint smile, "my other plans for the day involved staring at a wall." "So, this is a definite upgrade," he found himself smiling back, a real one that reached his eyes. "Okay then, but don't say I didn't warn you when you get grease on your sweater." The garage was at the edge of town, a sprawling metal building with a faded sign that read, "Henderson's Auto, Repair an Old Battery." Man with a kind face and oil-stained hands was leaning against the counter when they walked in. Leo introduced himself, and the man, whose name was Sam Henderson, led them to the back where the minivan sat, looking even more defeated than it had on the highway. Sam gave a low whistle. "She's seen better days, huh?" Leo nodded. "That's putting it mildly." Sam ran a hand over the engine, his expression grim. "The transmission's shot, son, and the engine block is cracked." "You'd spend more fixing it than it's worth." Leo's heart sank. He had expected bad news, but not a death sentence. So what now? He asked. His voice hollow. Sam shrugged. I can give you a couple hundred for scrap parts. That's about the best I can do. Leo stared at the van, the last tangible piece of their old life, and nodded slowly. Okay, he said the word, feeling like a stone in his throat. As he turned away, he saw Clara standing a few feet back, her arms crossed her expression, a mixture of sympathy and something else, something he couldn't quite place. She hadn't said a word, she just watched and waited, letting him have the moment, a moment he hadn't realized he needed until it was over the ride. Walk back to the motel was quiet. Leo's mind was a numb buzz. The $200 from Sam Henderson felt less like a lifeline and more like an insult, a final punctuation mark on a long chapter of failures he could feel. Clara's presence beside him, a steady rhythm of footsteps on the cracked sidewalk, but he didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the crumbling brick of the buildings they passed, on the weeds pushing through the pavement, on anything but the pity he was sure he'd see in her face. When they reached the Sleepy Hollow Inn, Leo stopped at the vending machine, fumbling in his pocket for a few loose quarters. He needed something to do with his hands, something to distract from the hollow feeling in his chest. Maya ran out to meet them, her face bright with a smile that was completely at odds with the grayness of his mood. Daddy, can we go to the park? The one with the big slide. We saw it on our way here. Leo looked at her, trying to summon a smile that didn't feel like a lie. Maybe later, kiddo. Dad's got some stuff to figure out first. Maya's face fell just a little, but she nodded and hugged his leg with a fierce loyalty that both saved and broke him every single day. Clara had been watching them from a few feet away, her silence a deliberate and careful thing. Now she stepped forward. So what's the plan, architect? She asked her. Tone was light, not mocking, but it was the word architect that caught him off guard. No one had called him that in months. I'm not an architect anymore, he said, his voice flat. Right now I'm just a guy with $200 and no car. Clara tilted her head. But you still know how to build things right. You know how to see what's broken and imagine how to make it whole again. He stared at her, confused by the question, what's your point? My point is that a title is just a word. It's not who you are. You're a builder, Leo. You build things that last. That's not something you lose just because you lose a job. Her words were so direct, so certain, that they cut through the fog of his self-pity. For a moment, he saw a flicker of the man. He used to be the one who could solve complex problems with a pencil and a piece of paper, the one who saw potential where others saw decay. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since leaving the garage, and saw not pity but a challenge, and maybe something that looked a lot like faith. They ended up at the park, after all, the one with the big red slide that spiraled down from a wooden tower like a blank dragon's tongue. Maya shrieked with delight as she slid down again and again, her laughter echoing through the quiet afternoon. Leo sat on a nearby bench, watching her, a faint smile on his lips. The heavy weight in his chest had lightened just a little, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Clara sat beside him, her legs crossed, her hands resting in her lap. She wasn't looking at Maya, she was looking at the town hall across the street, a beautiful old building with peeling paint and a clock tower that had been stuck at 4:15 for what looked like years. That's a beautiful building, she said quietly. It was, Leo said, probably built in the 30s. Good bones, but it needs work. A lot of work. The town doesn't have the money to fix it. I asked Sam at the garage, he said. They've been trying to get a grant for years. Clara nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the clock tower. What would it take to get that clock running again? Leo followed her gaze. A new gear system, probably a full rewiring, maybe even custom parts. It wouldn't be cheap, but it could be done. He said the words automatically, the architect in him taking over for a moment before he caught himself. He shook his head. It doesn't matter. It's just a clock. But it's more than that, isn't it? Clara said, turning to him. It's a symbol, a heart for the town. If it's not beating, the rest of the town feels it too. He looked at her, surprised by her insight. "You see things people don't usually notice." "So do you," she replied, her eyes holding his for a beat longer than necessary. That was the moment he realized she wasn't just a kind stranger with a fancy car and a knack for being in the right place at the right time. She was something else, something more dangerous, something that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in a very long time. A week trickled by in the slow, unhurried pace of Havenwood. Leo picked up a few odd jobs from a notice board in the local diner, fixing a leaky faucet for the baker, sanding down a porch for the librarian. Small tasks that paid in cash and kept his hands busy. He always paid Clara back for the motel room each night, leaving the exact amount in cash on the small table between their rooms. She never mentioned it, just as she never mentioned the muffins and coffee that appeared outside his door each morning. It became their silent routine, a delicate balance of pride and kindness. Clara, for her part, seemed to be in no hurry to leave. She spent her days reading in the park, talking with the elderly woman who ran the local bookstore, and taking long walks along the creek at the edge of town. She seemed to be shedding a skin, a layer of polish and restraint that had clung to her on the highway. Now, she wore her hair down more often, and her laughter, when it came, was less guarded, more real. One afternoon, Leo was in the middle of patching a hole in plaque tees, the roof of the diner, when he saw her below, talking with Maya. Maya was showing her a drawing, a wild scribble of colors and shapes. Clara was listening intently, nodding seriously, as Maya explained the intricate backstory of the purple blob. In the corner from his vantage point on the roof, Leo watched them and felt something shift inside him. He had been so focused on keeping his and Maya's world small and safe, a fortress of two against the world. But Clara had slipped through the walls. Without him even noticing, she hadn't pushed or pried. She had just shown up and stayed, offering quiet support and a perspective that was slowly starting to chip away at the armor he had built around his heart. When he climbed down from the roof later that day, his hands sore and his face smudged with tar, Clara was waiting for him, with 2 cold bottles of water. She handed one to him, their fingers brushing briefly. He didn't pull away. This time, "You know," she said casually, "you're starting to become a local legend. The guy who can fix anything." He gave a dry laugh. "Yeah, well, legends don't usually live in motel rooms." "No," she said, her eyes serious. "They just remind people what's worth saving." He held her gaze, wondering if she was still talking about the town's leaky roofs or if she was talking about something else entirely. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked into a crisp white envelope and left on the hood of Clara's car. There was no stamp, no return address, just Leo's name, written in a familiar, elegant script. He picked it up, feeling the weight of the thick paper in his hand. He hesitated before opening it, a sense of unease fluttering in his gut. He had just finished a small plumbing job for the motel owner, and was on his way to meet Clara and Maya for lunch at the diner. A new, surprisingly comfortable routine they had fallen into. He tore open the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It wasn't a letter, it was an article, a printout from a financial news website. The headline was stark, "Unforgiving Tech Titan Clara Vance vanishes, speculation mounts over multi-billion-dollar empire." Below the headline was a photo, a professionally shot portrait of Clara. It was the same woman, the same startling blue eyes, the same determined set of her jaw. But this version of her was different. She wore a sharp black blazer, and her hair was styled in a sleek, severe cut. She looked powerful, untouchable, a world away from the woman who wore faded sweaters and laughed at Maya's silly jokes. Leo read the first few paragraphs, his heart sinking with each word. Clara Vance, the enigmatic CEO of Vance Industries, a global leader in artificial intelligence and data analytics, had not been seen in public for over 2 months. Her sudden disappearance had sent shockwaves through the tech world, leaving investors and board members scrambling for answers. The article speculated wildly. Burnout, a hostile takeover, a secret illness. But the truth, Leo realized, was sitting in a diner down the street, waiting for him, with a grilled cheese and a smile. He folded the paper, his hands shaking slightly. He felt a cold knot of betrayal tighten in his stomach. She hadn't just been vague about her past. She had been hiding an entire universe. He walked into the diner, the bell above the door, chiming mockingly. Clara and Maya were sitting in a booth by the window. Maya was drawing on a napkin and Clara was watching her, a soft, genuine smile on her face. She looked up as he approached, her smile widening until she saw the expression on his face. "Leo, what's wrong?" He didn't say anything. He just slid the folded article across the table. Her smile vanished, the color drained from her face. As she looked down at her own picture, staring back at her, the silence in the booth was suddenly deafening, the cheerful chatter of the diner fading into a dull roar in Leo's ears. Maya looked up, sensing the shift in the grasped air. Her crayon pausing mid-scribble. "Daddy, are you mad?" Clara folded the paper with slow, deliberate movements. Her hands were steady, but Leo could see a faint tremor in her fingers. She tucked it away into her purse, her gaze never leaving his. "Leo, I can explain." He shook his head slightly, not in anger, but in a kind of numb disbelief. "Explain what? That you're not just a woman with a nice car and good taste in music, that you're a billionaire CEO who's apparently missing." His voice was low, but it cut through the air like a blade. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, her eyes pleading, "when, after you got tired of playing small-town girl and decided to go back to your real life. That's not fair, Leo. And this isn't real." He gestured around the small diner, at the cracked vinyl of the booth, at his own worn-out work shirt. "This is a vacation for you, a little escape from your boardrooms and stock options. For me, this is it. This is my life." The hurt in his voice was raw and deep. Clara flinched as if he'd struck her. "That's not what this was," she said. "I wasn't playing a game." He let out a bitter laugh. "Weren't you? You let me think. You were just like me. Someone trying to find their way. You let me fix your car and pay you back for motel rooms. With the last few dollars in my pocket, was that part of the game too, watching the poor handyman try to keep his dignity." Clara's face crumpled. "Never wanted to take your dignity, Leo. I just wanted to feel like a person for a minute. Not a headline, not a price tag." He stood up abruptly, the booth scraping against the floor. Maya jumped at the sound, her eyes wide with fear. "Well, congratulations," he said, his voice thick with a pain he couldn't hide. "Now you're a headline again, and you dragged us right into it with you." He threw a few crumpled bills on the table to cover their food, then took Maya's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. We're leaving." Maya looked from her father's stony face to Clara's tear-streaked one. "But Dad," she started. Leo pulled her gently but firmly out of the booth. "Now Maya." He didn't look back as they walked out of the diner, leaving Clara sitting alone in the booth with the ghost of their shared laughter and the weight of a secret that had just shattered everything. The town of Havenwood was small enough that news traveled on the wind, and the story of the fight in the diner was no exception. By evening, whispers had turned to quiet speculation. Leo kept to himself, holed up in the motel room with Maya, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since they left the diner. He tried to read her a book, but his voice was flat and hollow. She didn't ask about Clara, but her name hung in the air. Between them, a silent, heavy presence. Leo felt a gnawing mix of anger and shame. He was angry at Clara for the deception, for making him feel like a fool. But he was also angry at himself for letting her in, for allowing himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could happen to him again around sunset. There was a soft knock on the door. Leo ignored it. It was probably the motel owner, with fresh towels. The knocking came again, more persistent. This time. Leo sighed and opened the door, ready to send whoever it was away. Clara stood on the other side. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She was holding a small, worn teddy bear in her hands. one she must have bought from the local thrift store. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He started to close the door. "Please, Leo, just 5 minutes for Maya." He hesitated, then stepped aside, letting her in. But he stood by the door, his arms crossed a human barrier between her and his daughter Maya, who had been sitting on the bed, looked up and her face lit up for a half-second before she remembered she was supposed to be sad. Clara knelt and held out the bear. "I saw this and I thought of you," she said to Maya. "He looks like a good listener." Maya took the bear hesitantly, her small fingers tracing its stitched smile. Then Clara looked at Leo, her gaze unflinching. "I lied to you," she said. "Not by what I said, but by what I didn't say, and I am so sorry. I was a coward. I was so tired of being Clara Vance that I just wanted to be Clara for a while. I wanted to know what it felt like to be seen for who I am, not what I own. And you did that. You and Maya, you saw me. He didn't respond. His jaw was tight, a muscle flexing in his cheek. "I know I hurt you," she continued, her voice cracking, "and I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to know that none of it was a lie the way I felt sitting with you by the side of the road watching you with Maya. That was the most real thing that has happened to me in years." He finally spoke, his voice rough. "You should have trusted me." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I know," she said. "I was afraid you'd look at me differently, the way everyone else does. And now I've lost the one person who didn't." The silence returned, more painful than before, because now it was filled with the truth, the weight of what could have been, and what was now broken beyond repair. Clara didn't stay long. She left the bear with Maya, gave Leo one last shattered look, and walked out into the falling darkness. The door clicked shut behind her, and the sound echoed. In the small room, like a final verdict, Leo sank onto the edge of the bed and buried his face in his hands. Maya came over and put her small hand on his back. The teddy bear clutched in her other arm. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. Sometimes, people make mistakes that night. Leo couldn't sleep. He lay on the stiff motel bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the soft, even breathing of his daughter in the next bed. The anger had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache, a deep and profound sense of loss. He replayed their conversation, over and over. In his head, her apology, her explanation, her pain. He had been so focused on his own wounded pride that he hadn't truly seen hers. She hadn't been playing a game, she had been hiding from a life that had become a gilded cage, and he, in his own way, had been doing the same, hiding from a world that had repeatedly knocked him down. He had built walls around his heart to protect himself and his daughter. But in doing so, he had also shut out the first glimmer of light he'd seen in years. He remembered her words on their first night in Havenwood. "Everyone deserves a safe place to land." He had been that for her for a little while, and she had been that for him too. He had been so quick to judge, so quick to assume the worst, because it was easier than risking his heart again. It was safer to believe she was just another person who would eventually leave than to confront the terrifying possibility that she might have actually wanted to stay. He got out of bed and walked to the window. Pulling back the thin curtain, the town was dark and quiet. Only light, coming from the street lamps that cast a lonely orange glow on the empty sidewalks. He saw her car still parked in its spot, a sleek silver shadow. In the darkness, she hadn't left. He felt a pull, a desperate urge to go to her. To tell her he understood, to take back the harsh words he had thrown at her like stones. But he didn't. His fear and his pride were old stubborn companions, and they held him in place, rooted to the spot by a lifetime of disappointment. He let the curtain fall and went back to bed. But the ache in his chest remained a silent testament to the chance he was letting slip through his fingers. The first reporter showed up the next morning, a young woman with a microphone, and a cameraman who hovered behind her like a vulture. They were waiting in the parking lot when Leo took Maya to the diner for breakfast. "Mr. Morgan, a question about your relationship with Clara Vance." Leo ignored them, his hand tightening on Maya's shoulder. As he hurried her inside the diner, the whispers started as soon as they sat down. People looked over their menus, their faces, a mixture of curiosity and judgment. By noon, there were 3 more news vans parked outside the Plaber. Sleepy Hollow Inn, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like weapons. It was a full-blown media circus in a town that probably hadn't seen this much excitement since the county fair of '98. The story was everywhere. On TV. On the internet. Clara Vance, the reclusive billionaire found in a dusty desert town with a mysterious handyman. The narrative they spun was a predictable one, a tragic romance, a story of 2 worlds colliding. Some painted Leo as a gold digger. Others as a salt-of-the-earth hero who had captured the heart of a lonely heiress. Both versions made his skin crawl. They were turning his life, his struggles, his connection with Clara into a cheap soap opera, a commodity to be consumed and discarded. Leo felt trapped. He couldn't leave the motel without being ambushed. He couldn't take Maya to the park without a camera lens, following their every move. The quiet sanctuary of Havenwood had become a cage, and he was the main attraction in the zoo. Late that afternoon, Sam Henderson from the garage showed up at his door. He pushed past the reporters with a gruff word and a dismissive wave. "I figured you could use a friend," he said, handing Leo a bag of groceries. Leo let him in, grateful for a friendly face in the sea of strangers. "How are you holding up, son?" Sam asked, his kind eyes filled with concern. "I've been better," Leo admitted, running a hand through his hair. Sam nodded. "This whole thing is a mess, but the town's got your back. You know that. We know who you are, Leo. You're a good man, a good father. Don't let them tell you otherwise." Leo appreciated the words, but they did little to ease the knot of anxiety in his gut. It wasn't just about the reporters, it was about Clara. He hadn't seen her since their fight. He assumed she was holed up in her room trying to weather the same storm, but her silence felt like a chasm between them, a distance that grew with every passing hour. Later that night, as he was putting Maya to bed, she looked at him with her wide, serious eyes. "Is Miss Clara going to leave now, Daddy?" she asked, her voice. Small Leo's heart clenched. He didn't know how to answer, that he didn't know the answer himself, so he just hugged her tight and said, "I don't know, sweetheart, I don't know." But as he sat in the dark, long after she had fallen asleep, he realized, with a pang of dread, that he had probably already pushed her away for good. The breaking point came on the 3rd day of the media siege. Leo was trying to sneak out the back of the motel to get some fresh air when a particularly aggressive reporter cornered him, shoving a microphone in his face. "Is it true? You're planning to sue Clara Vance for emotional distress?" Mr. Morgan. Leo froze, his blood running cold. Sue her? The thought was so absurd, so grotesque, that he couldn't even form a response. The reporter pressed on. "Sources say you feel she used you to escape her responsibilities. Is that true?" Leo's hands clenched into fists. The urge to lash out was a physical force, a white-hot wave of anger that threatened to consume him. But then he looked past the reporter and saw Maya standing in the doorway of their room, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. That was it. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. He wasn't going to let this circus destroy his daughter's sense of safety. He wasn't going to let them turn him into a monster. He pushed past the reporter without a word, scooped Maya into his arms and marched back into the room. He locked the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get them out of there, out of Havenwood, out of the spotlight, away from the poison that had seeped into their quiet lives. He spent the next hour making calls, his voice low. Urgent. He called Sam Henderson, who agreed to lend him an old pickup truck. No questions asked. He called the librarian he'd done work for and asked if she could watch Maya for a few hours. While he got things sorted, she agreed instantly, her voice full of warmth and support. He packed their few belongings into their duffel bags, his movements quick and efficient. He was a man with a mission, a father protecting his cub from a pack of wolves. When he was done, he sat down with Maya and explained that they were going on another adventure. A new one, a secret one. She looked at him, her eyes full of a wisdom that was far too old for her. "Years are we running away?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, sweetheart, we're finding our way back to quiet." He didn't say goodbye. To Clara, he didn't leave a note. He couldn't. The risk of it being intercepted and twisted into another headline was too great. He just left a key on the counter and walked away, his heart, a heavy leaden weight in his chest as he drove out of Havenwood in Sam's borrowed truck, with Maya asleep in the passenger seat. He didn't look back. He couldn't bear to see the town that had briefly been their sanctuary disappearing in the rearview mirror. He was doing the right thing. He told himself he was protecting his daughter. But as the miles stretched out before them, on the dark, empty highway, the quiet in the cab of the truck felt less like peace and more like a profound and irreversible loneliness. Clara found out Leo was gone from the motel owner. A kind woman named Martha, who knocked on her door with a sad look in her eyes and a key card in her hand. "He left this for you." She said he didn't say where he was going, just that he needed to get his little girl away from all this. Clara took the key. Her hand numbed the room, felt suddenly cold and empty. She walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The spot where the old pickup truck had been was now vacant, a stark and undeniable symbol of his departure. She had driven him away. She had brought the storm to his quiet harbor, and he had done the only thing a good father could do. He had set sail for safer waters. The reporters were gone now. Having lost their main characters, the town of Havenwood was slowly returning to its sleepy rhythm, but for Clara the silence was deafening. She stayed in the motel room for 2 more days, surrounded by the ghosts of their brief time together. She could still hear Maya's laughter, still see Leo's tired smile, still feel the fragile hope that had bloomed between them before it was trampled under the weight of her world. She had come to Havenwood to escape being Clara Vance, but she had only succeeded in reminding herself that she couldn't outrun who she was. Her money, her power, her name, they were a part of her, and they had a gravitational pull that drew everything around her into their orbit, whether she wanted them to or not. On the 3rd day she made a decision. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she could try to make something good come from the wreckage. She called her assistant, her voice clear and decisive for the first time in months. She gave orders. She set things in motion. She used the power she had been running from, not for herself, but for the town that had unknowingly given her a glimpse of what she had been missing. She started with the town hall, the beautiful old building. With the broken clock, she established an anonymous foundation, the Havenwood Restoration Fund, and made a multi-million-dollar donation. Its first project was the complete restoration of the town hall, including the broken clock tower. She hired a team of the best historical architects and engineers, instructing them to use local labor whenever possible. She didn't put her name on it. The foundation was listed as a private trust with no public-facing board members. But she knew the town would feel the impact. They would see the heart of their community start to beat again. It wasn't a solution, it wasn't an apology that could be spoken, but it was a start. It was a way of giving back a piece of what she had taken, a way of honoring the quiet dignity of a place, and a man who had reminded her what it meant to build something that lasts. It took 2 months for the news to reach Leo. He had settled with Maya in a small town in Oregon, a quiet place nestled between pine forests and a winding river. He had found a steady job working for a small construction company. His hands were calloused again, and his mind was blessedly free of headlines and reporters. Maya was enrolled in the local school and had made a new friend, a little boy, who shared her love for drawing purple blobs. They were okay. They were safe. The quiet had returned, but it was a different kind of quiet now, one that was tinged with a faint and persistent melancholy. He saw the article on a news site he stumbled upon by accident: Havenwood, a town reborn, a headline that was a world away from the ones that had chased him out of the desert. The article detailed the miraculous restoration of the town hall, the revitalization of the main street, and the new sense of hope that had swept through the community. It mentioned the anonymous foundation that had made it all possible, but Leo knew, he knew it was her. He clicked on a link to the town's local newspaper and saw a picture of the restored clock tower, its hands, moving its face, gleaming in the sun. And below it, a quote from Sam Henderson. "This wasn't just about fixing a building," he said. "It was about someone reminding us that we were worth fixing." Leo closed the laptop, his throat tight. She hadn't just left, she had stayed in the only way she knew how. She had used her power. Not to control or to conquer, but to heal, to build, to give back. He looked at the drawing Maya had made, that was still taped to the wall of their small apartment. A purple blob with a crown and a stick figure with a kind smile. It was a reminder of a woman who had seen them, who had cared for them, who had made a mistake, but had tried to make it right. In a way that was bigger than words, he thought about the fear that had driven him away, the pride that had kept him silent. He had been so focused on protecting what he had that he had failed to see what he could have built with her. He had run from the storm, but in doing so, he had also run from the sun that came after it. That night, he sat down with a piece of .com paper and a pen. He didn't know if she would ever see it, he didn't know where to send it, but he had to write it anyway. He had to let the words out before they fossilized in his heart. He wrote about his fear, about his pride, about his regret. He wrote about Maya and how she still asked about the lady with the kind eyes, and the teddy bear. He wrote about the clock tower, and how he knew it was her. He didn't ask her to come back. He didn't make any promises. He just ended the letter with a simple and honest truth. "You were right. I'm a builder. I just forgot that the best things are built with someone else." He folded the letter and put it in a drawer, unsure if it would ever find its way to her. But the act of writing it felt like the first step toward rebuilding something within himself. He had to find her. He didn't know how or where, but the thought had taken root in his mind, a stubborn and insistent seed. He couldn't let their story end with a silent act of charity and an unsent letter. It deserved more. It deserved a conversation, a chance at a real ending, whatever that might be. He started with the only clue he had, Vance Industries, a name that had once felt like a betrayal, now felt like a beacon. He spent his nights after Maya was asleep, digging through public records, corporate filings, and archived news articles. It was a world he didn't understand, a labyrinth of holding companies and offshore accounts. But he was a builder, and he knew how to read a blueprint. He was looking for a pattern, a weak spot, a place where the real Clara might still exist behind the corporate facade. He found it in a small environmental nonprofit that Vance Industries had quietly funded for years. It was a cause that was deeply personal to Clara's late mother, a fact he discovered in a dusty old society column. He followed the trail and found a name, a lawyer who sat on the dock. Nonprofit's board, a woman who had been with the Vance family for decades. It was a long shot, a crazy one, but it was the only shot he had. He found an address for her office in San Francisco, and with a deep breath, he mailed the letter. He didn't know if it would ever reach Clara, but he had to try. He had to believe that some messages were important enough to find their way home. 2 weeks passed with no response. Leo tried not to let the silence get to him. He focused on his work on Maya, on the steady rhythm of their new life. But the hope was there, a quiet flame that he tended to in the dark hours of the night. Then one evening, as he was helping Maya with her homework, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. His heart leaped into his throat. He answered, his hand trembling slightly. "Hello," a woman's voice answered, clear and professional. "Am I speaking with Mr. Leo Morgan?" "Yes," he said, his voice raspy. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm Clara's aunt. She asked me to call you." Leo's breath caught. He couldn't speak. Eleanor's voice softened. "She got your letter, Leo. She's in Switzerland at a conference, but she's flying back tomorrow. She wants to see you." There was a pause. Then she added, "She never stopped talking about you. You know? You and your daughter?" He closed his eyes, a wave of relief, so powerful, it almost buckled his knees washing over him, where he asked, "Where should I meet her?" Eleanor gave him the address of a small private airfield, just outside of Seattle. "She's not coming back to the spotlight, Leo. She said she's coming back for you." Leo drove through the night, the miles blurring under the tires of his borrowed truck. Maya slept in the passenger seat, her head pillowed on a rolled-up jacket. The world outside was dark and quiet, but for the first time in months, Leo's mind was clear. He wasn't running anymore, he was driving. Toward something, toward a chance at a future he had been too afraid to claim. The private airfield was small and discreet, nestled in a valley surrounded by pine-covered hills. There were no commercial jets, no bustling terminals, just a few sleek private planes parked on the tarmac like resting birds. Leo parked the truck and sat for a moment watching the sky. The morning was cool and misty, the air smelling of rain and jet fuel. A small jet, a silver one that looked vaguely familiar, landed with a quiet whoosh of its engines and taxied to a stop a few hundred feet away. The door opened, and a figure emerged. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. It was her. She was dressed in simple black pants and a cream-colored sweater, her hair pulled back, her face free of makeup. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright and clear. She saw him immediately and stopped at the bottom of the stairs, her hands clutching the strap of her small duffel bag. Leo got out of the truck, his legs feeling unsteady. He started walking toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. She started walking toward him. They met in the middle of the tarmac, the cool, misty air swirling around them. They didn't speak for a long moment. They just looked at each other, taking in the changes, the new lines of worry around her eyes, the quiet strength that had settled in his shoulders. "I got your letter," she said finally, her voice a soft whisper. "I got your clock tower," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. She smiled back, a real one that reached her eyes and transformed her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry for everything." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry I ran. I was scared." She stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm just to make sure he was real. "I was scared too," she said, "but I'm not anymore." He covered her hand with his calloused fingers, to a stark contrast to her smooth skin. "I love you, Clara," he said, the words coming out on a raw and honest breath. "I love you too, Leo," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, and in the shadow of the silver jet with the misty morning air as their witness, they closed the distance between them and kissed. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was a quiet one, a kiss of homecoming, of forgiveness, of two broken pieces, finally fitting together to make something whole and beautiful and real. From the truck, Maya watched them, a small smile on her face. I knew this wasn't the end of their adventure, it was just the beginning. The house was a work in progress, a beautiful old farmhouse on a few acres of land, just outside of Havenwood. It had good bones, but it had been neglected for years. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and the fields were overgrown with weeds. But to Leo, it was a canvas, a place to build a future from the ground up. Clara had bought it through a trust. Her name nowhere on the deed, but her touch was everywhere, in the plans he drafted for the renovation, in the sustainable materials she had sourced, in the way she had insisted on a workshop for him and a studio for Maya, filled with every art supply a little girl could dream of. They worked on it together. Side by side, he taught her how to use a power drill. She taught him how to read a balance sheet. They painted walls, planted a garden, and argued over the color of the kitchen cabinets. They were a team, a partnership built on a foundation of honesty and trust that was stronger than any concrete they could pour. Maya thrived in the space. She had a room with a window that looked out over the fields, and she spent her afternoons climbing trees and chasing butterflies. Her laughter was the soundtrack of their new life, a constant and joyful reminder of what they were building. and why one evening, as the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the half-finished house, they sat on the warm golden glow porch, steps together, a sleeping Maya nestled between them. Leo had his arm around Clara, her head resting on his shoulder. They watched the sky turn from orange to purple, the first stars beginning to appear. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet, "I never thought I'd have this again. This kind of peace." Clara looked up at him, her eyes full of a deep and steady love. "Me neither," she said. "I spent my whole life chasing success, thinking it would make me happy, but it was always empty. This," she gestured to the messy yard, the unfinished porch, the sleeping child between them, "this is full." He kissed the top of her head, his heart swelling with a gratitude that was too big for words. They still had a lot of work to do on the house and on themselves, but for the first time in a very long time, they were both exactly where they were supposed to be, home. The sign was simple, hand-painted on a piece of reclaimed wood and hung above the wide doors of the newly built barn at the edge of their property. It read, "Vance Morgan Designs, Sustainable Architecture for a Better World." It was their new venture, a company that combined his vision and her resources to create beautiful and sustainable buildings for small communities like Havenwood. They weren't building skyscrapers or corporate headquarters. They were building libraries, community centers, and affordable housing. They were building things that mattered, the common. Grand opening was a small affair, just friends and neighbors from Havenwood. Sam Henderson was there, his face beaming with pride, the librarian, the baker, the motel owner. They all came to celebrate the couple who had not only found each other, but had also found a way to give back to the town that had brought them together. Leo and Clara stood by the entrance, greeting their guests, hand in hand. He wore a clean, button-down shirt, and she wore a simple blue dress. They looked happy, content, at peace with themselves and with each other. Maya, now a bright and confident 10-year-old, was in charge of handing out brochures, her face serious with the weight of her responsibility. Later, as the party wound down and the sun began to set, they stood together watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. Clara leaned her head on Leo's shoulder, her heart full. "We did it," she whispered. "We built something good." He wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Yeah," he said, "we did." They stood there in the warm evening air, surrounded by the sounds of laughter and the gentle hum of a community that had been given a new lease on life. They had come from two different worlds, two different lives. But they had found common ground in their shared belief in the power of kindness, of second chances, and of building a future that was not just successful, but also good. And as they watched the stars come out one by one, they knew that their greatest design, their most beautiful creation, was the life they had built together, a life filled with love, purpose, and the quiet joy of coming home.